Sairam. Oh. Sairam, everyone, and welcome back. I'm sure you all enjoyed the delicious food that was prepared for us, and you're ready for the afternoon's session. My name is Menka Prasad, and I'm from the Orlando Sci Center, and I'll be your MC for this afternoon's proceedings. In case you're asking yourself why this name sounds familiar, it's probably because you've written and mailed a check to Menka Prasad, you've sent a Zelle payment to Menka Prasad, or you've received a text, a phone call, an email, or all of the above asking for your check or your Zelle payment. Well, over the last few months, it's been a pleasure to have been a part of the core planning committee with Sister Pretty and the rest of the ladies. And I've seen a lot of familiar faces from the last two pre-world conferences that were held in Orlando 2010, 2015. So it's nice to be back with new faces, the familiar and the friendly. So welcome back, and I'm glad to be here with you all. So I'll get straight to it. Our first speaker for this afternoon's session will be talking to us about learning to embrace vulnerability. So our sister that's going to talk to us, her name is Anila Narayan. Anila has been in Swami's fold from a young age. She's been involved in the SSC classes, serving the homeless and in nursing homes, and is a recent high school graduate from Colorado. She learned to embrace vulnerability and its ability to unite people. After learning of the isolating effects of mental illness, she has become passionate about spreading awareness and breaking the stigmas surrounding mental health. She hopes to use vulnerability and positivity as tools to foster empathy between people. And one fun fact about Anila before she makes her way up here, I learned that Anila loves zucchini but hates bell peppers. So if she ever coming over to your home for lunch, remember not to cook bell peppers. And like any other teenager, she likes to hang out with her friends and to take short naps. Please put your hands together and welcome Sister Anila Narayan.
Sairam, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited. Okay. Going to Sci Center every Sunday was something that was normal for me growing up. It was my weekly routine. It was just my normal. I loved SSE and singing bhajans, but I didn't have a truly personal connection with Baba. I admired the work he did building schools and hospitals, but at that time I saw him as more of a philanthropist or a role model to emulate. He never appeared in a dream, nothing ever materialized in front of me. There was no miracle. And I still learned a lot from SSE classes, and the 5 human values of peace, love, truth, nonviolence, and right conduct were pillars that shaped how I tried to live. At first, I just didn't see the connection between those values and Baba, other than that he lived and taught them. As I grew older and as things changed, one of the things that changed was my outlook on Swami. I began to see him for the small miracles and the little things that touch us, like finding a brownie at home after wanting one all day, or things a little bigger, like getting to go to a school I wanted to. To give you a little bit of sense as to who I was, as I look back to my elementary school days, I remember being called sensitive. I felt a calling to learn and work as best as I could, so if I didn't know the answer to a question, I felt inadequate. Teachers admired my work ethic, but they said I needed to build thicker skin. And as I got a little bit older, and as my sensitive nature grew on me, I was always reminded to never cry in front of others, because vulnerability was weakness. I remember hating that I wasn't thick-skinned and struggled to not show my emotions in public. And the worst part about this was that it was really unnatural for the sensitive person that I was. I liked being able to talk about how I felt, and being able to do that helped me process myself and the emotions I was feeling. But I had to keep reminding myself that that was a bad thing to do, and confiding in others was not a good thing to do. And so eventually, talking about how I felt became weakness in my mind. And I remember one time a friend told me, "You overthink, you become too invested, you care too much." And as I grew older, I saw more reasons like this to hide my sensitivity. And I worked hard to handle the criticism and to hold in my emotions most of the time, even though sometimes it would feel unnatural, and to keep everything bottled up. But I kept at it, fearing the label. And sometimes still, my true nature would spill out. In middle school, I remember really being fixated with the idea of being the best. It didn't matter what it was at, or it just had to be something or anything. I just wanted to be the best. And so when the title of nerd fell into my lap, I really clung to that. And I took a lot of pride in being seen that way, and I really wanted to uphold this image of being the best at academics. And I just became increasingly fixated with the idea of being perfect. And I literally remember praying at the altar, praying that I would be perfect. And with that overwhelming desire to be the best and to be perfect came a lot of unhealthy comparison. I would look at friends and my sister, and I examined every area where I fell short and scrutinized all of my flaws. And a little later, I ended up moving schools. And naturally, being the new kid, I no longer had that nerd label, and that belonged to other students now. But that was all I had known, and if I wasn't the best, then what was I? I certainly wasn't perfect if I didn't have this label. So I did the only thing that I thought to do. I tried to emulate them. I remember the only shoes that they would wear would be sneakers, so I wouldn't wear boots or anything like that. I would only wear sneakers. And I guess I thought in my mind, they're too busy focusing on academics to care about fashion or what kind of shoes they're wearing, so I shouldn't either. And I know it was really dumb, but I just clung to this idea that there was only one model of success. And I felt that in order to be successful, I had to be like them. And I didn't think that I was worthy of achieving what I wanted to by just being me. And I don't mean to sound like this was all bad. Being surrounded by these people definitely motivated me in ways that I hadn't been before. And it pushed me to new areas. And I'm really, really grateful for that. But I never really regained that title of being the best or being the nerd or anything. So I think in my subconscious, I just thought to myself, if I have to be the best at something, it doesn't matter what it is. So if I'm not going to be the best at academics, then I need to be the best at being the skinniest. And I turned to my weight. And this started in the 8th grade. And it started really slowly. At first, I would just eat less of my lunch. I would give away most of the food and only eat an apple or something. And then I was always counting calories, and I was giving away my breakfast too. And then I was constantly weighing myself. And I had trouble understanding easy concepts because my brain had no fuel, and I just didn't have the energy. And I was sleeping so much more because I was just always tired, because there was nothing that my body was running off of. And eventually I was eating less than 500 calories a day, and I was over-exercising. And giving away my lunch in the cafeteria morphed into skipping meals altogether. My eyes bore into nutrition labels, and I was triple-checking calorie counts just to make sure that I didn't exceed my self-imposed daily limits. The idea that my body was inferior consumed me, and I had quickly fallen prey to an eating disorder. And it was almost like I could hear the strike of a gavel in my ears and in my heart. And it was like the scale was my jury, and my sense of self-worth was at stake. And the worst part about having an eating disorder is you feel incredibly lonely. In our hierarchy of needs, we have our physiological needs, and we have our needs for safety. But once those are satisfied, the next need that we have is to feel like we are loved and like we are accepted and like we belong. And I didn't feel like that. But I was still so committed to my goal, and no amount of weight loss satisfied me. And that just kept distancing the people in my life. My family didn't understand why I was hurting myself like this, and they were sad and frustrated, and they didn't understand why I had this goal so badly to lose all this weight. But to me, anyone who wasn't in support of me losing more weight, who wanted me to gain that weight back, was simply against me, and they didn't want me to succeed. And eventually my parents insisted that I see an eating disorder therapist, and I unwillingly accepted. And I just didn't see how she could help, because for me, losing weight symbolized my dedication to this goal. It was about enduring the hair loss, enduring the fatigue, about enduring the stomach aches until I was the best, the skinniest. But as I sat across her desk, she asked if I could share my story. And my eyes welled with tears as I began talking, and this was one of the first times that I had ever cried in front of a stranger. I broke down, and she was empathetic. And being vulnerable with her allowed her to convince me of what no one had prior, that recovery wasn't failure, and that it didn't mean that I was giving up if I was eating again. And for the first time, I was able to lower my walls and defenses. And I was so used to pushing back against everyone who didn't understand me, their disapproval, making me work that much harder at my goal. But it felt like more than me gaining weight back, she just wanted me to feel better again. And it truly felt like someone was on my side. And it was really comforting to feel supported, but that didn't necessarily make recovery easy. Because the thing about having an eating disorder is, in order to recover, you have to face a thing that you have feared for so long. You have to gain weight back. And that was difficult for me to accept and do in a healthy way. And I was so used to suppressing my body's cues that I didn't even know what hunger was at this point. And I was like a prisoner chained in by my own restrictions for so long, and I didn't know what it was to be free anymore. And then one day, I just broke. And I stopped caring, and I started eating so much. And because I was chained in by my restrictions for so long, when I finally let myself go from that, I didn't know how to cope, because I was like, what if I never am able to do this again? What if one day I just put these restrictions back on myself? I need to eat as much as I can right now. And I would eat like after everyone was asleep so that no one could judge me. And it didn't even matter if I liked what I was eating or not, because I just needed to keep eating. And I remember one day just feeling so ashamed and so embarrassed, and I tried to make myself vomit it all back, but I physically couldn't, so I just kept eating and kept feeling the shame instead. And it was now a year and 9 months since the start of this ordeal, but eventually I did recover physically, and eventually my weight did even out. And I wish I could tell you that all of a sudden a switch just flipped and that one day everything just changed. But there was no story like that. It was painfully gradual, and I didn't even realize recovery was happening when it was. And I wish I could tell you definitively what made me recover. And I've thought a lot about this, but I can't put my finger on one reason. Maybe it was because it was just time. Maybe it was because this was a new year and a new start for me. And maybe it was just Swamp Me. But either way, I'm just really grateful, because recovery can be an incredibly long process. It can take years, decades, and some people never recover. But mentally and physically, there were still scars. And the thing was, I consider my eating disorder as not necessarily the actions that were self-destructive and led to me losing weight, but it was a mentality that I had that led me towards those actions, and it was all about that mentality. And I hated that I had put myself through this, and I held so much regret, and it felt like I had really gained nothing out of this whole entire long process. Like, I definitely wasn't the skinniest one. My family didn't trust me to make decisions about food for a really long time, scared that I would relapse. And I had stretch marks that every time I looked at them would remind me of what had happened and all that I had been through. But at least I was out of it physically. My journey to mental recovery was much longer and even more gradual, and it happened through talking to others about what had happened. No one really knew outside of my family, my doctor, and my therapist, But I was terrified that if I told anyone that they would judge me, and I was scared that I wouldn't be accepted if I told anyone. And even now, I would be lying if I said that I wasn't scared about what would happen after telling you all about this. And I think I feared it as much just because it would be admitting what I never wanted to admit. I had wanted to be perfect for so long, and had kept working towards this goal, but telling people that I had this eating disorder would be admitting that I never was. And being vulnerable is really scary, and you give yourself reasons to shy away from it. You fear the stigma, and you don't want people to look at you like you're a ticking time bomb or like you're gonna relapse all of a sudden. And that's one of the most heartbreaking things about eating disorders and mental illness in general. A lot of people are scared to speak up because they don't know how it'll be accepted, and that's why education and awareness are so important. And I mustered up the courage to share my story. And when I had told someone earlier on, and that person was actually Jan Auntie right here, and she was the person who actually learned about the power of vulnerability. And as we were talking about it that day, suddenly a stream of vibhuti appeared from her to me, and this sort of path, and it felt like Swami was there and he was validating that this path of vulnerability is okay to take. And he was validating and putting his stamp of approval on sharing my story. And he was endorsing that vulnerability is the quickest way to connect to people. And it was then that I had also learned about Dr. Brené Brown, who is also a leading researcher about vulnerability and shame and empathy. Her TED Talks was one of the most widely viewed ever, and she's written multiple books about the subject. And as she says, vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. Vulnerability is a birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It is a source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. If we want greater clarity in our purpose or deeper and more meaningful spiritual lives, vulnerability is the path. And it was invigorating to hear this from someone who had literally done concrete scientific research on this. So I had received this numerical validation from the world, but I had also received validation from Swami. And I'd mentioned before that there was never a materialization that happened for me. He never appeared in a dream. But him showing up now felt like he was truly there for me, and he was truly okay with me being vulnerable. And it was really freeing to know that I didn't have to bottle up those feelings anymore. And it was okay to find comfort in talking with other people about how I felt. And that's why I'm giving this talk today, with a vision of women helping women. And sometime later, after I had achieved that mental recovery and that true recovery, I was watching the movie Inside Out. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, but throughout the story, we see someone really struggle to prevent sadness from being expressed, and she tries to hold back her emotions and just have happiness be the only thing that shows up. And I remember the first time I was watching that movie, I was thinking to myself, wow, sadness is causing so many problems right now. She needs to just leave. If she left, then all of these problems would be solved. But as we see at the end of the story, the movie closes with sadness being an essential part of life and something that can't be ignored. It is through sharing our sadness and through sharing the really hard parts that we grow as people and that we grow our relationships with other people. I remember watching that scene over and over again and literally just sobbing and thinking about that insight. It takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable, but overcoming that fear leads to more deeper relationships with the people we love most. And I learned that perfection isn't a necessity. And I learned to see my value outside of my weight and my GPA and the things that I thought had defined me. When I saw my value as a friend and as a person, I became a lot more confident and more ambitious and more comfortable just being me. And as Brené Brown says, what we know matters, but who we are matters more. And another quote from her, because I just find her really inspirational. When you numb the dark, you numb the light. And when I finally stopped numbing the dark, it encouraged other people to be vulnerable too. And I stopped feeling like there was some standard that I needed to uphold, and I stopped feeling like I needed to reach perfection. Because there are faults with all of us, but we're all trying to improve, and that's okay. And I'm finally at a point where I can truly say that I'm happy being me, faults, imperfections, weaknesses, and all. I had held so much resentment towards myself about this eating disorder, and I had so much regret. But looking back, it is through this eating disorder that I have grown. My flawed notion of needing perfection, of what success truly meant, they had been shattered. But most importantly, I learned that how we look and the numbers that appear underneath the scale will never outweigh the lessons we learn and our relationships with those we love. And one of my biggest takeaways, and what I hope to impart today, is that we're all going through something, but none of us are alone. And vulnerability is the key to realizing that. Swami is the bridge between our hearts to hearts. And at the beginning of this talk, I said that for me, Swami is about the small miracles we have. And that's what he represented for me. It's not about the wells that were built or the hospitals or even the materializations of Vibhuti, though all of those are important. And for me, all of those are reminders that he is there for us. And even that Vibhuti showing up wasn't about Vibhuti. It was about the fact that he was there for me, and he's there for all of us. And he helped me reach true recovery, and that was my biggest miracle. Thank you, and Sairam.
I'm sure we can all agree, what a source of inspiration. You know, Swami says the youth is the future. And one thing we can see that stands out, like at a young age, Anila shares her story. She's searching for herself from middle school to high school. So we want to thank her for sharing her journey of vulnerability, this idea of trying to be perfect at whatever age that we put on ourselves or the society puts on us, and then we end up in such difficult situations. She's brought an awareness here amongst us in the Sai sisterhood, how she was challenged with this eating disorder. And it's definitely not a topic that's ever really discussed in a Sai setting. So it's amazing that she has this strength and an awareness to recover and get to this point in her life and to be able to share with us her process. I hope that you can all see that no matter how difficult things may get, we all have to learn to never give up and to always trust in Swami. So once again, please put your hands together for Sister Anila. It's hard to move on to the next topic after her journey here. Okay, so at this point, like this morning, we have 5 parallel workshops again. 2 of the workshops are not available because it was just for the morning session. So at the back of your badges, your PM session, you know where to go. And as soon as the workshops are finished, there will be a tea break, and then you will reassemble here for 4:20. Okay? Thank you, and let's assemble for our workshops.